I used to live in this old apartment building. My name is Sabrina, and this took place about 5 years ago now. My place had 1 bedroom and 1.5 bathrooms. Overall, it was not the greatest, but I didn't mind it. I was on the 2nd floor, and there were lots of other people living in the building. But several months after I had started living there, I got a new next-door neighbor. His name was Arthur, and he was a creep from almost the very start. I know that the way he met me was strange enough. I left my apartment and was walking down the hallway. He came up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder, startling me. Then he introduced himself, and it was really awkward. He told me that he lived next door and stuff, and from that point I thought maybe he was just an awkward guy. But he spoke to me a couple more times and didn't really seem shy or anything. In fact, the next time that I saw him, he was just standing out in the hallway, not really seeming to be going anywhere. When I left my place, he approached me and asked me if I wanted to come over to his place. I said that I was busy and I had to go somewhere, and I declined. After this, Arthur tried to ask me out a couple of times when he saw me in the hallway, but I said no each time. He struck me as a little bit odd and creepy. All of these interactions with him happened within the first month that he lived there. It was starting to get annoying, because it seemed like almost half the time that I left my place, he would leave after me or be in the hallway. Then, one night, I was in my apartment and went to take out my trash. We did not have a trash chute on my floor, and we had to walk all the way down to the basement to take it out. So I got on my flip-flops and left my place and walked down to the basement. I was gone for maybe 2 or 3 minutes at most. Then I returned to my apartment and went back inside of it. It was kind of late at this point, and I was tired, so I decided to get ready for bed. I wasn't necessarily planning to go to sleep right away, but probably just watch some shows in bed. So I started to go around and turn all the lights off in my place. When I passed by my broom closet, I was sure that I heard a noise inside of it. This was very weird. I didn't know what it could be. The last thing that I was expecting was for a person to be in there. But when I opened the door, I saw Arthur standing right inside. I jumped back and started running for my bedroom. Arthur emerged from the broom closet and then actually started going after me. After I got inside my bedroom, I slammed the door shut, but I didn't have enough time to lock it. Arthur was there within seconds, and I saw him starting to open the door. I had the half bathroom attached to my bedroom, and I ran for that door. I got inside and shut the door behind me just after Arthur had gotten inside of my bedroom. This door had a slightly different lock, and I was just able to lock it on time before Arthur reached. He then tried opening the door and then started banging on it. Fortunately, I had my cell phone in my pocket. I dialed 911 as fast as I could. Neither Arthur or me said anything in this time. After trying to open the bathroom door multiple times, Arthur then started banging on it. I finally spoke and yelled that I had called the police. Then I talked to the 911 operator. I told her exactly what was going on. In this time, Arthur finally walked away from the bathroom door. However, I couldn't tell if he had left my apartment or was just in the other room, so I stayed hidden in the bathroom. It felt like forever that I was waiting until the police showed up. In that time, I didn't hear anything, and when they got there, I finally came out of the bathroom, but Arthur was not in my apartment anywhere. I told the police where he lived, which was obviously right next door, but Arthur had left. Eventually, though, the police were able to locate him. Apparently, he had gotten into similar trouble in the past and had a bit of a history. I obviously didn't lock my door when I went to take out the trash that night. Arthur must have just walked right in and hid in my closet. I'm glad that I found him when I did, even though that made for one of the scariest moments of my life. I live alone in a house. I've only lived here for a couple of years, and I would describe the neighborhood as quiet. There are a lot of other houses around, and most of the neighbors are very nice. Well, last year, I had hardly ever seen my next-door neighbor to the west. Only once or twice did I ever notice her. As far as I knew, there was just one woman who lived there. Her yard was right next to mine, so I would have been able to see if she ever went outside, but I never did. It was a little bit mysterious, but not something that seemed that crazy. Well, one night I was home and it was pretty late. Before bed, I was getting my things ready for the next day. I realized that I couldn't find my wallet. After looking around for a few minutes, I thought that maybe I forgot it in my car. Sometimes it would fall out of my pocket. My car was parked in the driveway, so I left my house and walked outside. It was very dark and quiet. I went out to my car and opened up the driver's door, and sure enough, my wallet was sitting there on the seat. So I picked it up and then started to head back inside. But as I did, I noticed that my next door neighbor was outside. She was standing in her yard, not that far away, and kind of looking at me. It seemed kind of weird to be out this late, and I didn't really know what she was doing. I just turned and walked back up my driveway to the house. Then I went back inside. As I got back into the kitchen, I put my wallet back on the counter where I usually kept it. Then I was going to head into the other room. Except that's when I noticed out the window that my neighbor was now in my yard. She had seemingly walked over and was now right next to the driveway. I was wondering what exactly she was doing over here. Then I watched as she walked right up to my window. She then went right up next to it and started looking inside of my house. It was really strange. She didn't wave at me or anything, but appeared to be looking in my direction. Then she moved down really quick. I didn't know what to make of it, so I left the room. But a few minutes later, I went back into the kitchen to see if she had in fact left, but she didn't. She was now standing at another window and looking in. I didn't know if she could see me or not. I wasn't that close to the window, and when I noticed her, I sort of moved back and around the corner. I watched her, and she was just staring into the window. She kept looking in for like 5 minutes straight. Then, finally, she moved away. After that, I went over to the window and I watched her going back into her yard and then back inside of her house. I was so confused by this whole situation. After that, I just went to bed though. I didn't really know what to do. And I didn't see my neighbor for months after that. Since then, I've only seen her a couple of times. I've never brought up what happened. I still don't know what she was doing. This happened back when I was a kid. I don't remember every detail that well, but I will tell you what I can. I believe I was 10 years old at this time. I lived with my parents and 2 siblings in a pretty average-sized house. In our neighborhood, there were lots of other houses. I would often go out into the front or backyard and hang out with my siblings. So one time, I know that I was in the front yard, but I was by myself. I was playing with this dodgeball that we had and I was kicking it around. I kicked it one of the times, and I guess it went a little far and ended up going out into the street. Now, the street that we lived in was usually pretty quiet, and there were not regularly cars driving down. My parents still always told me not to leave our yard, but I had to go to get the ball, so I started to run after it as I saw it rolling down the street. When I got out into the street, I was still a long ways from the ball. That's when I noticed a man standing on the side of the road near the sidewalk. He was a few houses down from mine, and he walked over and picked up the ball. There were a few cars parked on the side of the road as well. The man was standing like maybe he had gotten out of one. I went a little bit closer, and when the guy noticed me, he waved. I remember that I thought he would toss the ball back to me. I waved at him and held my hands out for the ball, but instead, he waved me over to him. Then, I walked the rest of the way towards the guy, and when I got to him, he asked me if it was my ball, and I said yes. The guy then unlocked the car parked near the side of the road that was by us. He then tried to get me to go inside of it. I don't remember exactly what he said, but I think he might have told me that he'd give the ball back if I went with him. I just know that while holding onto the ball, he got into the driver's seat and then opened up the back door. I knew better than to get inside of this guy's car though. I was still really confused. I wasn't really sure who this guy was and why he was here in the first place. After sitting in the driver's seat of the car and opening the back door, he then tossed the ball into the back seat. He motioned for me to go in, but instead, I just turned and ran back towards our house. I knew this guy was trouble. He did not chase after me, and when I got back into the front yard, I finally stopped. I watched this guy drive away in the opposite direction, not going by our house. Then I went inside. I found my mom and told her about it. She went outside, but the guy was gone. She ended up calling the police about it. Unfortunately, I couldn't give very good details. I didn't know the license plate or even exactly what kind of car it was. And to this day, I don't remember any details like that. The man got away with stealing my ball, but more importantly, he wasn't able to kidnap me. However, I remember a couple of years later, I think it was, when I was maybe 12 or 13, I was going on a walk through my neighborhood, and I happened to be one street over from mine. I rarely went to this street when I was a kid, but I know that when I was walking down the street, I happened to pass by this one house, and I saw this guy that was outside in the yard. When I saw him, I remembered the guy from a couple of years ago. I wasn't 100% sure, but I think it was the same guy. I never said anything or did anything because I really wasn't 100%, and I didn't want to accuse the guy, but I still think to this day that that was the same person. I own a house and I live by myself in it. I've not lived there for really that long, maybe 6 months. This is something that happened just a few weeks ago now. So for some background, I've always considered the neighborhood to be very average. It's not like a wealthy area, but it's also not known to be a bad neighborhood. Most of the people that I've met have been really nice. Of course, I didn't meet all my neighbors, but just a few. In the entire 6 months or so that I've lived in my house, everything has been fine, except for one night. A couple of weeks ago, like I mentioned, something really strange happened. I was in my living room sitting on my couch late one night. I think it was about 11 p.m. All of a sudden, my doorbell rang like 3 or 4 times in a row. It was really surprising. I didn't know why somebody would be at my house this late. I got up from the couch and walked over to the door. When I got there, I looked out of the window and nobody was there. I even opened up the door and went out onto the front step. I looked around but didn't see anybody. So then I went back inside of my house. But just a minute later, there was a knock on the front door. It was very loud, and I went over to the door again. But once more, whoever had knocked was gone. At this point, I figured that it was probably some neighborhood kids ding-dong ditching me. I thought they probably wouldn't come back. I waited around by the front door for a little while anyways, though. After a few minutes, nobody came back, so I finally returned to the living room. Maybe 10 minutes after this, there was a loud banging on the front door again. This time, I heard them knocking on a front window as well. I ran from the living room as fast as I could to get over to the front door. When I arrived, the people had stopped, but I was just able to see them running away. I saw what appeared to be 3 grown men running from the end of my driveway and into the street. I had figured it to be teenagers, but these guys looked a little older. Still, it was probably just a harmless prank. But the fact that one of them was banging on the front window next to the door this time was a little bit weird. After 10 minutes went by with nothing, I returned to the other room again. Some more time went by, and I actually thought that they were gone for good now. By this time, it was getting really late. But then they came back yet again, and this time was the worst by far. I first heard a really loud knock at the front door. I started running over there again, and as I was doing so, I suddenly heard the sound of glass breaking. When I arrived near the front door, I saw that the window in my front door had been broken. There was glass on the ground, and this made me so angry that I ran over to the door and went outside. I saw the same 3 men running away into the street. I ran through my front yard and into the street after them. They were pretty far ahead of me, but I saw them go into a house that was almost at the end of the street. After they all went inside, I kept going down the street until I got to the house. My plan was to confront them. This was not a silly joke anymore, but now a crime. Their house was probably the worst looking one on the entire street. I walked up to the front door and knocked on it, but nobody responded. I continued to knock on their door, and I wasn't going to go away. After I was knocking for a few minutes, I heard somebody yell from inside for me to leave. I yelled back that they broke my window. There was a few minutes of nothing. But then, I heard somebody coming from behind the house. There was a person out in the yard. I couldn't see much because they had no porch light there or anything. Moments after hearing whoever it was get to the side of the house, I looked over, and then I heard something whiz past my head and hit a bush. Somebody threw a rock at me. Then another one nearly hit me, and instead hit the side of the house. I turned around and started running away. When I was sprinting off the property, I heard at least 2 people laughing, which made me really mad. Still, I couldn't stay there. I got back to my house and was not chased or anything. Once I was there, I called the police. They came out a short time later, and after showing them my window and telling them what had happened, they went over to the neighbors. Apparently, about 5 adults lived in that house, and most of them were drug addicts. They had multiple illegal drugs inside of the house, so when the cops showed up at the front door, they panicked and one guy tried running away. The police ended up going inside and finding the drugs, and multiple people were arrested. I also pressed charges against them for both throwing rocks at me and breaking my window. Shortly after that, the house was sold to new owners who turned the place around. I live by myself in a 1-bedroom apartment. My building has 4 floors and I'm on the top. I've enjoyed living here for the most part, but I almost moved out after something that happened a while ago. It's now been 4 months since the incident occurred. I had been living there long enough to know several of my neighbors and what they looked like. I would occasionally see them coming and going as I did. I wasn't really friends with any of them though. Well, one night, like any other, I went to bed at the time I usually did, about 10 o'clock. I remember waking up in the middle of the night though, and immediately hearing this noise. It sounded like my apartment door was being unlocked. The next thing that I knew, my front door opened up. When I heard this, I was suddenly wide awake, and I got out of my bed and stood up. But I didn't really hear anything else now. I was wondering what exactly was going on. After like a minute, I walked to my doorway, which was closed. Then I slowly opened up the door. Every light was off in my apartment, so I really couldn't see much of anything. About the only light came from my window, which was partly open, and there were some lights from outside. So I looked out into the rest of my apartment, and after several moments, I still didn't hear or see anything. There was a light switch that I could just barely reach. I felt around on the wall and then turned the light on. As soon as it came on, I saw that there was this random woman standing in the middle of my living room. It was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. But then I realized that this wasn't some random woman. She was one of my neighbors. As soon as I noticed her, she moved and started running away towards the front door. Then she left my apartment and was gone. I really had no idea what was happening, but I knew that the woman was not supposed to be in my place, so I called the cops. I waited around until they got there. The woman was my neighbor from down the hallway, and I had never even spoken to her, but I had seen her a few times here and there. After the police got there, I told them that my neighbor had somehow broken into my place. I gave them all the details of what happened. They went over to my neighbor's and knocked on her door. I remember that she acted like she had been asleep and had no clue what was going on. She completely denied the entire thing. I was afraid that it was going to just be my word against hers, but luckily, my apartment building had pretty good security cameras. After looking at them, it was clear that she had entered my place. Somehow, she was able to pick the lock. I honestly have no clue, but I pressed charges against her, and she was evicted shortly after. My apartment building also had to replace the locks. I really don't know why she wanted to get into my place. I'm really glad that I woke up when I did though.